So far on the channel, we've covered most of Japan's early entries into the North American luxury market. We've done all the OG Acuras, the OG Lexuses, the Q45, the Maxima, the Cressida. We've even looked at Mitsubishi's swing at the premium segment. So where are all the Mazda luxury cars? Well, some of them we didn't get, and some of them got cancelled. But eventually Mazda did try sending us the 929, the export name for the Luce, which was their flagship model. They even had a whole new luxury brand planned for us, hoping to jump on the same bandwagon the big three Japanese automakers had. Not everything went to plan for Mazda though, but let's take a look at what we did get. Two 929s and the Millenia, a vehicle originally intended for that luxury brand that never happened. So we'll start our story with the 1988 model, the first 929 to make it here, and Mazda's first real attempt at selling a premium sedan in North America. By 1987, Acura, Toyota, and Nissan had all proved there was demand for upmarket Japanese sedans here, so Mazda, now it's your turn. Let's see what you can do.
Congratulations, and thank you for choosing the 929. We realize you might have chosen from among many
VHS tape owner's manual supplements. Remember those? At first glance, the 929 is pretty unassuming. The styling is typical 1980s formal, not really trying anything new except for an unusual grille which John Davis called a cheese grater. From the front, it looks like it could be the Legend sedan's older brother. The back shares some design similarities to the 626. I do appreciate the chrome trim around the grille, lights, windows, and on the door handles, all of which does help to upscale it. On the inside, there are some clear American influences. There are thick padded seats with optional button-tufted leather. If you don't elect for the leather option, you still get very thick velour cloth. Driver's seat lumbar support is standard and 8-way power adjustments is an option.
It's sad, but many drivers never quite learn how to properly adjust the seat.
Door panels are carpeted along the bottom with courtesy lights built into the armrests and large grab handles for satisfyingly slamming the door shut, and maybe also for your passengers to hold on to. This is a rear drive car after all. The instrument cluster is narrow and wide with the usual array of indicator lights, including one to advise you if a taillight is out. There's a speedo, a tach, temp and fuel gauges, and a voltmeter, but no oil pressure gauge. Now this is an 80s car, so of course there's an optional digital cluster, and it is pretty cool looking. The wood grain, if you're wondering, in this picture is aftermarket. It looks unusually good for aftermarket though, and it makes me think that maybe Mazda should have put some wood grain in themselves, or at least have had it as an option. If my 19-year-old self could hear me today advocating for wood grain, he'd throw up. The trunk is massive for a rear drive car, and liftover is nice and low. The steering wheel comes straight out of the 80s Mazda parts bin, but it is leather wrapped, and a tilt and telescopic column is standard. The automatic climate control comes standard with AC and uses slider controls with a variety of push buttons. The center vents have a swing feature, which when enabled oscillates the vents back and forth, an interesting gimmick that Mazda first showed us on the 626. Both the driver and passenger get lap vents, a once common automobile feature that never should have been discontinued. Rear passengers might not get any climate vents, but they do get their own map lights. You see, back in the 80s, literacy was still a widespread skill. We can safely assume that Mazda's new flagship has all the expected power features as standard, even a power antenna, and the mirrors are heated as well. A power glass moonroof is optional, and a cold option package adds heated front seats. The 6-speaker audio system comes standard with a cassette and a 5-band graphic EQ, and a CD player is optional. Overall, it's a nice interior, but it does lack any sort of real cup holders. This doesn't count, Mazda. Shockingly, these are not the worst cup holders you will see in this video. Under the hood is Mazda's first V6 engine, the J family, which originally debuted in 1986 in other markets. In North America, the 929 gets the 3-liter single overhead cam version, rated at 158 horsepower and 170 pound-feet of torque. Sending power to the rear wheels is usually an electronically controlled 4-speed auto with economy and power modes, plus a hold feature which you can engage to hold the transmission in first, second, or third. Amazingly though, Mazda actually did offer a manual transmission, and it used the 5-speed out of the RX-7 Turbo. In Japan, you could actually get the Luce with the turbo rotary engine out of the RX-7 as well. But that option definitely would not have worked in our market. I don't think very many executives are interested in preheating their spark plugs in a toaster oven on occasion just to get their luxury sedan to actually start.
Remember, your 929 has a sophisticated multi-point electronic fuel injection system. The best starting settings are programmed into it. Pushing or pumping the gas pedal only confuses the microprocessor.
I'm sure that very few 929s in America were sold with manuals, but it's cool that Mazda at least gave us the option. I have to give Mazda credit, they've been one of the better manufacturers for giving North Americans manual options over the years. And I'm not just talking about MX-5s or Mazda 3s. You could get a manual in a CX-5 up until 2016, way later than most SUVs in its class. And the CX-30 was offered with a manual transmission when it came out in 2019. I was actually working at a Mazda dealer when the CX-30 came out, and one of the first ones they sent us was a manual. I couldn't believe Mazda was offering their new crossover with a stick. Needless to say, I was impressed, but the sales department was pissed because they knew they'd have a hard time selling it. Stopping power on the 929 comes from discs on all four corners, and ABS is an option. The 929 has independent front and rear suspension and an optional automatic adjusting suspension system, definitely a Euro-inspired feature. With this option, you can select Sport, Soft, or let the computer decide, but either way, don't expect a firm, cornering on rails sports sedan sort of ride. Mazda designed this luxury car in the days long before sporty and luxury became overlapping markets, so suspension tuning on the 929 is definitely on the soft side. The 929 gets updated for the 1990 model year, now featuring a revised grille designed to look a bit more prominent with an extra layer of teeth and a full chrome outline. The front turn signals have been inverted and the door handles are now body colored. They've blacked out the chrome trim around the lights, and I think this particularly has a negative effect on the look of the tail lights. The chrome trim looked way better. I thought this was supposed to be a luxury car, Mazda, come on! Inside there's a new steering wheel, and Mazda's added just a little bit of wood grain. There's also a 929S model added as an upper trim, which comes with a dual overhead cam 24-valve version of the V6 engine, which makes 190 horsepower and 191 pound-feet of torque. This model also gets lace-spoke aluminum alloy wheels, standard ABS, and speed-sensitive variable power steering. By 1990, they had discontinued the manual transmission since I'm sure nearly no one was buying it. You can only lead a horse to water, you can't make it drink. 1991 was the last year of the first generation of the North American 929, and while the Luce actually outsold the Legend in their home market, it did not achieve the same results over here. I couldn't find any sales numbers, but I know the 929 is a pretty slept-on car here. Most people don't even remember it. I do think it's a nice car, but I think Mazda might have played it a little too safe. Maybe it needed a little extra character in its styling to help it stand out. Maybe they should have given us the Japanese front end. On paper, it beats its Euro competition, at least from a value perspective. But whether buyers in the premium market want to admit it or not, for most of them, value is not a key driver in their purchase decisions. Status, however, is, and this little Mazda badge was not going to bring you any of that in the late 80s. In 1992, the Luce was replaced by the Mazda Sentia, and we'll talk about the Sentia-based 929 next. However, the Luce did remain in production in Japan for taxi cabs until 1996, and Mazda licensed the Luce platform to Kia, where they then slapped on a new grille and a hood ornament, and started manufacturing and selling them in South Korea as the Kia Potentia all the way up until 2002. Kia designers added their own flair to the design in 1997 when they developed their own in-house facelift for the model. Despite this model's limited success here on our continent, there is a lot to like about this 929. The luxury market only gets more crowded as we enter the 90s though, so Mazda, let's see what you can do.
It's sad, but many drivers never quite learn how to properly adjust the seat.
With the Luce discontinued, Mazda introduced a new model, the Sentia, as its replacement, and Mazda's new top-level flagship sedan. When this model was introduced in Japan, it was sold through Mazda's new but would-be short-lived luxury brand Anfini, and the model designation was the MS9. When this model came to North America as the new 929 for the 92 model year, it was rumored that Mazda would soon be introducing a new upscale brand here as well, called Amati.
Rumor is that the 929 is the basis for a V8 luxury sedan to be sold by Mazda's Amati luxury car division 2 years from now.
Of course, we know that neither Amati nor a V8 ever happened, but more on that later. What we did get was this 929, which was actually called the 929 Serenia in Canada. No idea why they added that extra word to the model name up here. It was powered by an updated version of the dual overhead cam V6 from last year, now outputting 195 horsepower and 200 pound-feet of torque. The transmission remains exclusively a 4-speed auto.
As if.
Hey, Mazda offered us a stick, we turned it down. There's no longer user-adjustable power settings, it now chooses between power and normal shift points for you based on your driving, but it does retain that hold feature. This all resulted in a very smooth feeling drivetrain. In fact, in a 10-car, 30K luxury sedan shootout done in 1992 by Car and Driver, one writer was quoted as saying it was possibly the smoothest, most refined drivetrain here. They ended up ranking the 929 in 6th place, well, actually tied for 6th place with the Pontiac Bonneville, one place below the Acura Legend and one place above the Amati. The only weak point they cited was its handling, but I don't think the 929 was designed to be a sports sedan. It was designed to be comfortable, and it is. Now when it comes to the styling, I don't really much care for this rounded, bubbly look, but if you put yourself back in 1992, this would have looked really modern. And if you read period reviews of this car from 92, the styling was actually quite well received.
The look is fluid and smooth, as individual as its predecessor was bland.
The new 626, which came out in 93, followed many of the same styling cues. On the front there are standard fog lights, long narrow headlights, and a grille attempting to look formal by being trimmed out with a thick border of chrome, featuring Mazda's new logo. Now I'm sure many of you remember Mazda's short-lived mid-90s logo, but take a close look at this one. This version of the logo with the sharp edges that kind of looks like a diamond in an oval was only used in 1992 because apparently it was too similar to the Renault logo, which I kind of disagree with. Does Renault think they just own the diamond shape altogether? Either way, in response to Renault's complaint, Mazda went ahead and changed the logo design for 93, making the diamond shape more rounded, essentially making it a circle or maybe sort of a spade inside of an oval, and this is the one you probably remember. This pointy diamond version of the logo was only used for 1992, and the only model that made it to the US market with this badge was this 1992 929. But even then, some of the later production models actually have the updated, more rounded logo, making this pointy logo a pretty rare badge to see here. Now we know Mazda wouldn't actually end up using this updated Eternal Flame logo for very long either, but more on that later. Let's take a look at the inside of the new 929. Dual airbags are standard now, and this results in a pretty plain looking steering wheel, although admittedly it's a lot better than a lot of other early airbag steering wheels. They even figured out how to integrate the horn button so it doesn't have those separate horn buttons off to the side like you see on most other 90s steering wheels with airbags. For some reason, Mazda was able to figure that out before other manufacturers, yet in this same car they were unable to figure out how to give you both a glove box and a passenger airbag. Also, there are still no cup holders. Now taking a look at this dash, we have lost the voltmeter and we're left with a pretty standard 3-dial design, although it does have some nice trim rings. The clock is now analog, which is kind of nice, but because it's the early 90s, absolutely everything has to be bubbly and rounded, either circle or oval shaped. The automatic climate control does use a knob for temperature control, which is nice, better than the sliders of the previous generation, and it is nicely placed within easy reach of the driver. The center climate vents are a little weird, they're oddly placed and really small. Mazda claims they put a lot of thought and careful consideration into the placement of every single interior element, so I'd like to know what the thought process was for this. The standard audio system is a 6-speaker cassette player, and a CD player is optional, although that option requires getting leather first as a prerequisite. The longer wheelbase of the Sentia does allow this 929 better rear passenger room than the previous generation, although the trade-off is slightly less trunk space. But even with leather, I just don't find this to be a very premium looking interior. You do get some trim rings around the gauges, an outline around the shifter, chrome interior door handles, and that's it. The rest of the interior looks like it may as well be in the 626, and in 1993 it basically is. There are door-mounted courtesy lights, front and rear map lights, and all of your expected power options are still standard. A power sunroof is now standard, which is nice, and there's a very interesting optional upgrade for it. This option is called the solar-powered ventilation system, and vehicles equipped with this would have solar panels overlaid on the sunroof glass. And when the 929 is off and parked on a sunny day, the vehicle uses power generated by these panels to run a pair of auxiliary ventilation fans in the trunk, which sucks hot air out of the cabin through vents under the rear window glass and then expels it out through vents under the back of the car. Now I don't know how well this system works, and I'm sure the car still gets hot inside on a sunny day, but I would think this at least helps. And if there's sun out but it's not hot enough for the inside of your car to get above 59 degrees, it will direct this energy to charge your battery. I suppose the only potential downside is the solar panels would obstruct your view if you want to look through the glass with the roof closed, like maybe at night or something. But in 92, without the solar ventilation option, the standard sunroof is metal, not glass, so you can't do that anyway. Other options include the cold package, which again gives you heated front seats. There's also an available cellular phone, and a premium package, which adds a 12-speaker sound system with a CD changer, the necessary wiring for the cell phone, solar reflective glass, and a 4-way adjustable power passenger seat. 8-way power adjustments for the driver's seat are now standard.
It's sad, but many drivers never quite learn how to properly adjust the seat.
For 1993, we of course get the more rounded logo, and Mazda does decide to add some wood grain, but only to models with the premium package. Base model peasants don't get it. It helps, but in my mind this interior still could use some more upscaling work. Unique alloy wheels also get added to the premium package, and the sunroof is now a moonroof, which means it's glass, so you can gaze through it unobstructed if you don't have the solar option. In 1994, Mazda finally adds some cup holders. Now they aren't very good, but due to the lack of consideration for them in the original design, their options were somewhat limited without designing a whole new center console, which I guess was out of budget. But wait a minute. That's where the heated seat switches used to go. So where are those now? I can't find them anywhere else. Wait, this looks like a flip-up cover. No, don't tell me the switches are still there and they just added a lid over them.
What on earth is this, right? You may be wondering, what is under this little cover? And actually, in a more luxurious version of 929, in like a more luxurious trim, you have heated seats in here.
Well, that's exactly what they did. So you can't turn on or off your heated seats now without moving your drink out of the way first, and if you spill it, well, into the switches the liquid goes. This is quite possibly the worst design I have ever seen when it comes to cup holders, and this is from a brand that claims to be putting careful thought into the placement of every single interior element. But here's the thing. What happened here is when they realized people wanted cup holders, they kind of had to put them here, which would have been fine if they could have just moved the heated seat switches somewhere else, but because their carefully thought out interior had no switch blanks anywhere, they had nowhere to move them without significantly redesigning a panel somewhere, which they probably couldn't afford. Mazda was financially struggling after the Japanese economic collapse in 1992, and this led to the cancellation of their plans to launch that premium Amati brand in North America I mentioned earlier. It also eventually led to Ford increasing their stake in Mazda to 33.4% in 1996, which gave them a controlling interest, and in my opinion led to a dark era of Mazda that lasted for over a decade, with many disappointing and unreliable Ford-based models that severely damaged their reputation. But that's a story for another video. Anyways, if they had had some blanks like the previous generation had, then they would have had somewhere easy to move their switches. But here's the thing, Americans usually don't like to see blanks, especially in luxury cars.
We are also disappointed in the plastic plugs in the dash. The Japanese still haven't learned that such things have no place in a top-line car.
So they took them all away. Now they probably should have thought about cup holders in their original design, but to be fair, I think in the 90s that was a culture difference thing between America and Japan, and that's why we see a lot of Japanese cars from this era not have very good cup holders if they have them at all. Shockingly, these are still not the worst cup holders you will see in this video. Now also in 1994, Mazda actually added a limited slip diff to the cold package, which is pretty neat. But this would be the last year for the 929 in Canada. In the US, you got it for one more year, and for you in 95, leather along with most of the other options in the premium package became standard, leaving the only optional items left, the solar-powered ventilation system and the cold package, which does still include the limited slip diff. Remote keyless entry was added standard for 1995 as well. Now there would be a second Sentia generation, but we wouldn't see it here, and we wouldn't see another 929 badge here either, although the Australian market would see one based on the new Sentia. And again, like they had done with the Luce, the updated Sentia was also licensed to Kia to be sold as a Kia model, this time the Kia Enterprise. For us though, Mazda went a different route and sent us the front drive Millenia, which was originally planned to be a launch model for Amati had Mazda been able to go through with launching their premium brand. And yes, we're covering the Millenia in this video, so stay tuned, let's take a look. Before we really dive into the Millenia, we need to cover a little bit of the background. As I've already brought up in this video, in the early 90s, Mazda was planning to follow in the steps of Honda, Toyota, and Nissan and launch a premium brand of their own in North America. Mazda had launched the upscale sales channel Infini in their home market in 1991, and in August of that year they announced their plans for a North American premium brand called Amati, scheduled to launch in spring of '94. Amati would be able to compete directly with Acura, Lexus, and Infiniti, as well as with domestic and Euro luxury brands. Upscale branding in North America was already a proven viable strategy. By 1991, Lexus and Acura in particular were seeing great success in the market, and Infiniti was trying. By 1991, Mazda was selling their products through 5 different sales channels in Japan alone. Despite having less resources, Mazda was hoping this diversification strategy would eventually lead to them becoming the 3rd biggest Japanese automaker. Now, whether or not this strategy would have been successful is unclear because, as we know, this never happened. In 1992, the Japanese economy suffered a collapse, and the country entered a period of economic stagnation that would later become known as the Lost Decade. We've already talked about some of the effects this economic downturn had on Nissan in other videos. In the case of Mazda, they found themselves with a significant liquidity shortage. The brand essentially didn't have enough money to keep up with all of the new car lines they had already launched, much less invest in another one. Mazda was struggling to maintain itself, and build quality issues were starting to surface as a result. It was going to cost $50 million for them to launch the Amati 1000, which was going to be Amati's 12-cylinder flagship model, but that was money Mazda just didn't have. So in 1992, Amati was officially cancelled, and most of the Amati models along with it. It's rumored that the body of the Amati 1000 was repurposed into the 2nd generation Sentia, albeit with only half the planned cylinder count. The only planned Amati model that made it to North America was the Amati 500. After Amati was scrapped, Mazda decided that they would use this model as their new flagship for North America to replace the Sentia-based 929, which hadn't sold well. Of course, it had to be sold as a Mazda, so meet the Mazda Millenia. Overlapping the end of the 929's run just slightly, the Millenia went on sale in US and Canada for the 1995 model year. Why was it called the Millenia? Well, if you're old enough to remember the 90s, the hype leading up to 2000, the new millennium, was everywhere. Everything was being marketed as millennium this, millennia that. When we look at the Millenia's styling, we see a much more streamlined, I would say even sportier look compared to the outgoing 929. I actually like this front end. I think it looks kinda sporty and kinda upscale at the same time. The Millenia does have a very good fit and finish, and this was something that Mazda had really put some investment into. After all, they weren't going to have the benefit of an established luxury badge, or really a luxury badge at all, to communicate a perceived luxury status to the customer. If they wanted people to think this was a high quality vehicle, they would have to actually walk the walk. One of the ways they achieved this was by rotating the body of the Millenia on a machine in the drying booth after paint. This rotation was designed to help achieve a more even paint coat, eliminating paint runs and drastically reducing orange peel, as well as making the final paint coat thicker than it otherwise would be, increasing its durability against rock chipping. Hey guys, what do you think of my new luxury ride? It's called the Millenia. Luxury? You peasant, you're driving a Mazda. Mazda just doesn't make me pay for a different badge to inflate my ego. You guys are really just driving Hondas and Toyotas, so what's the difference? Isn't Millenia spelt with 2 N's? Inside the Millenia, well, there's some hits and there's some misses. The gauges are pretty unimaginative, and nothing about them gives you the impression that you're in anything higher end than a 626. Similar to the last 929, the climate controls are placed right by the driver's right hand, and the controls are large and simple. Climate vents are now conventionally positioned and shaped, but the unique curve of the dash gives the digital display screen above the controls an unusual shape. And it also angles the controls slightly towards the driver. Dual airbags are standard, and this time you actually get a glove box. The double-din audio cassette deck has very large knobs for volume and seeking, so even if you forget your reading glasses, you should be able to find these things. A trunk-mounted CD changer is an option. There's some nice wood grain trim around the shifter and audio unit, and the shift knob and steering wheel are leather-wrapped. Heated seats can be added as part of the 4 Seasons package, which also gives you traction control, a low washer fluid light, and larger washer fluid tank. The cup holders now fold out of this little slat in the center stack below the radio, which means Mazda has somehow again managed to design cup holders that, when in use, block the heated seat switches, and now they actually block the cigarette lighter as well. This is crazy, Mazda. I don't even know what to say. The Millenia was initially sold in 3 trim levels. There's the Millenia Base, which actually has cloth interior, and then there's the Millenia L, which comes with leather. This trim also adds power adjustments to the passenger seat, remote keyless entry, and a moonroof.
It's sad, but many drivers never quite learn how to properly adjust the seat.
The top trim is the Millenia S. This trim adds electronic traction control as standard, but the primary difference with this trim is what's under the hood, so let's talk about the engine options. Base and L trims are powered by the KLDE, another dual overhead cam V6, but with a smaller 2.5 liter displacement compared to what had been in the 929s. And power output is down a little, with horsepower at 170 and torque at 160. But in the Millenia S, there's a 2.3 liter Miller cycle V6. Now, what's a Miller cycle engine? Well, if you really want to learn the nitty-gritty of it, I'd recommend watching this guy's video, which I'll link in the description, because I definitely won't be able to explain it as well as him, but I will give you a very simplified explanation. In a Miller cycle engine, the intake valve doesn't close until the piston has already traveled partway back up the cylinder, usually around 20 or 30%. This gives it a higher expansion ratio, but you might be saying that leaving this intake valve open as the piston begins to travel back upwards means some of the charge will be expelled back out the open port, resulting in a loss of power. Miller cycle engines usually compensate for this with a supercharger, but if this setup is used in a car engine, it needs to be able to provide boost at low engine speeds, or else low speed performance is really going to suffer. So in the case of the Millenia engine, it uses a compressor that is driven directly by the engine, which forces more fuel and air into the cylinders. Because the compressor is driven directly by the engine, response time is effectively instant when you step on the throttle, so despite having a smaller displacement, this engine adds 40 horsepower over the base engine with virtually no penalty in fuel efficiency. So with just a 2.3 liter engine displacement, the Millenia S puts out 210 horsepower and 210 pound-feet of torque, which keeps it pretty in line with its competitors. Mazda was the first and at the time only manufacturer to use this engine design in a production vehicle. Now, as good as this engine sounds on paper, you certainly could argue that it makes it far more complex than the conventional larger V6s you'll find in an Acura or a Lexus, and generally, as we know, the more complex something is, the more expensive it is to service. And I can't say this thing looks particularly inviting to work on. The transmission is another 4-speed auto, and power now travels through the front wheels. 4-wheel disc brakes are a given, and ABS is now standard on all models. In 1995, the Millenia was generally well received, and the Millenia S had a 0 to 60 time of 8 seconds flat, which was pretty good for its class. Despite its smaller displacement, many journalists commented that it felt like a V8, which was good since Mazda had abandoned all plans of ever making one. The first notable update to the Millenia happens in 1997. The headlights lose their projector housings, which is an obvious cost-cutting measure, although Mazda claimed it provided broader illumination. They also downgraded the light aluminum hood to steel. The inside is mostly unchanged, but there's an updated CD cassette combo, and the horrible fold-out cup holders have been removed from the center stack, and they now fold out of the center console again, very similar to how they did in the previous generation, which this is getting comical now. Mazda just can't figure this out. I guess it won't block any buttons now, but your drink isn't going to have a flat surface to sit on. The 4Season option package now comes standard on the Millenia S. In 1998, the Millenia gets Mazda's updated logo, the Flying M, the one they still use today. You might wonder why they changed it again, having just changed it several years earlier. I think they were trying to streamline their branding at this point. Their planned luxury brands had all essentially failed, and now Mazda was integrating most of their sales channels into one. Amati never came to be, Unos ended in 1996, and Fini was eliminated in 1997, and even AutoZam, their key car sales channel, went defunct in 1998. They essentially now had one brand under which to sell everything, and to be quite honest, this logo wasn't very memorable because nobody even knew what it was supposed to be. The Flying M was intended to more clearly link the logo to their brand name, and unlike the Eternal Flame, from across the street you can actually see what it is. Also for 98, the Millenia L trim is eliminated, and you now either have base or S trims. Basically, they just put the things that the L model used to give you in an option package called the Premium package, which you can use to add leather, keyless entry, the moonroof, and the power seat adjustments to the base model. That stuff all remains standard on the S trim. For 1999, the Millenia gets a new grille with more prominent vertical grille lines, which of course makes it look more luxurious, and new clear lensed front turn signals. On the back, the turn signal lenses have been inverted as well, and chrome trim has been added around the license plate cutout. There's also new 17-inch 5-spoke chrome-plated alloy wheels on the Millenia S. The steering wheel logo is made more prominent, and they finally figured out how to place at least one cup holder in a manner that both holds a drink and doesn't block anything. For 2000, keyless entry becomes standard, as does an illuminated ignition, and Mazda adds a touch of wood trim to the doors around the window switches. To capitalize on the new Millennium hype, Mazda adds a new Millennium trim to the Millenia. This was actually placed above the S trim, and it uses the Miller engine, and it comes in some special colors. It uses a synthetic suede fabric for the upholstery, and it comes with everything the Millenia S does, plus an in-dash CD changer. This would be a 1-year only trim. The Millenia gets another, this time more significant facelift for 2001, and this time, well, I think they ruined it. This front end doesn't look special to me at all anymore. The new front end sheds all of the class it had in favor of a bland, typical early 2000s design that barely distinguishes itself from the front end of an MPV. The back has not been butchered as badly, it's not really worse or better, it's just got different taillights. Changes to the interior are more minor, leather is now standard, and there's a new gauge cluster which looks like it's kinda trying to emulate the Lexus clusters. They've added standard front side airbags, and a two-tone steering wheel now attempts to complement the two-tone dash. There's a new center console, and guys, you aren't going to believe this. They've moved the heated seat switches, and the cup holders block them again. And even if you have a base model without heated seats, they've decided to put the power driver's lumbar support switch there, which by the way was a newly standard feature they added for this refresh. So I don't know why they just didn't put that switch somewhere else. Now with both cup holders populated, you probably could sneak your hand back behind them to toggle these switches. But that would be a lot easier if they had not for some reason also put these flip-up covers over the cup holders. So now you've got that thing in your way. I mean, what is this? Is this intentional, Mazda? I'm starting to think that it is. How else could this exact same mistake keep reoccurring? I mean, maybe they just don't want you to drink in their cars. You might spill, you clumsy American, and ruin our beautiful craftsmanship. Maybe just reach behind you and use the backseat cup holders at this point. The Millenia S audio system is now a 9-speaker Bose unit, and an in-dash CD changer is an option to both models. A moonroof is now standard on the base model. There weren't any notable changes for 2002, and that would be the final year for the Millenia. And there was really no replacement for it. The new top dog for Mazda would be the Mazda 6, which replaced the 626 also in 2002, but it was again a mid-sized, mid-level sedan, occupying the same market space the 626 had. It would be a long time before Mazda would start taking swings at the premium segment again, but in more recent years, since the divestment by Ford, they've actually been quietly building themselves a more upscale image within all of their vehicles. Nowadays, they're really trying to position their vehicles as upscale alternatives to the conventional, all underneath that flying M. You can see this in all their recent models, and I think they're actually doing a pretty good job of it. A Mazda 3 is way more upscale than a Honda Civic now, yet the Civic costs about the same. The same can be said about their soccer mom SUVs. Compare a CX-5 to a CR-V, and there is no comparison. And again, the CR-V is not cheaper, although it sure feels cheaper when you sit in one. Now, when I was working at Mazda in 2019-2020, they started wanting us to refer to the dealership with our customers as a clubhouse, which I thought was so silly, and I still do, but I understand the image that they were trying to create. They really need to do some better marketing though, because there is no reason they shouldn't be outselling at least Nissan by this point. Mazda doesn't even use CVTs. That should be enough said right there.